Hello, we're Steve and Mary Alessi, pastors of Metro Life Church, and we're really delighted that you chose to join us today as part of our online campus. Now, at Metro, we are all about the 3 R's: relationship, relationship, relationship. What does that mean? It means we value relationship with God being first and foremost. Also, relationship with each other. People who walk through the doors of our church, we value those relationships. And then relationship with people outside of our church walls, which is why we believe this online campus is so important. It's allowing us to connect with you.
This is us getting to know you, and we're excited to do that. If you haven't had a chance yet, would you subscribe to our YouTube channel? Turn your notifications on so every time we go live or every time we post a video, you have quick access to it. And we hope that this message will be a blessing to you and it will encourage your walk with the Lord.
How many of you have been following the astronauts that have been stuck in space? Anybody? Very interesting story. It's astronaut Butch Wilmore and astronaut Suni Williams. They've been stuck in space since they arrived at the International Space Station this past June. They were hoping to return just 8 to 10 days later, but trouble with the vessel they were traveling in started to occur, and it was too much of a risk for them to come back on that vessel. The vessel returned, but it left them in space marooned. Now, NASA, they tell us, is reporting that the capsule that will ultimately bring them home won't be launched until March of 2025 at the earliest. Now, NASA's been scrambling, as you can imagine, to try to get those two people back home from the International Space Station, which is 250 miles away from its actually docking point. Now, it doesn't seem like it's only that close, but the reality is the distance between the takeoff and the space station is the equivalent to a drive from Miami to possibly Disneyland, Disney World, which many of you know about because you are season ticket holders of the Magic Kingdom. But just imagine that. First, imagine all the work that's going into transporting them back from the space station here to Earth. But take it a step further. Imagine what it would take to get from heaven here to Earth. Because that's exactly what God did on Christmas morning, as he took a part of himself, his son, and he transported him to Earth to be born in a manger. Now, if it was you and I'm sure we would have done it differently. For us, I know for me, I think I would have come as an adult and not have to deal with what would have been the helplessness of infancy and even the stress, frustration of puberty and adolescence. I just would have come as a man. How about you? Does that work better for you? I think I would have come as royalty. Not this whole thing about poverty. No, I think I would have come as royalty, or at least a person that would have had means and some measure of reputation here on earth. And when it came to dying for humanity, I think I would have died at least in the least painful and most dignified manner possible. I wouldn't want to have to go through all the pain of the cross. Only then, if I was to be risen from the dead, I would want to do so in a publicly and spectacular way that would definitely demonstrate and prove my divinity. But as we know, Jesus didn't do any of these things. Matter of fact, as the Son of God, he chose to do the exact opposite of that. And he entered humanity as a tiny fetus, born to peasant parents in a cow stall and laid in a feed trough, growing up in obscurity, living as an adult in relative poverty, And then he arranged to die in the cruelest, most demeaning and tortured manner that was ever devised for humanity's death. And afterward, he rose from the dead to appear only to a few of his devoted followers, not to thousands to prove it, but just to a few. Now, if we were to start looking at why Jesus would have done the things that Jesus did, the way in which he was born, to the way in which he lived, and to the way in which he died, that why would cause us to have to dissect maybe the love of God, which God's love being so strong that it had to press past all the sins of humanity. Or you would have to discuss what would have been the incarnation. And the incarnation is simply a matter of the divine of God taking on the humanity of man, which is deep and complex. And those are subjects that maybe if you'll come to church in 2025, we will discuss next year. But for today, let's look at the why through a different lens. I'm going to read some things because if you were to read your Bible, you would not be surprised in the way in which God sent his son. So as I read some things, I want you to mention, or at least try to come up with the people that I'm talking about here. For instance, when you look at how God does things, you have to start with a herdsman leaving his home, not knowing where he was going, traveling 700 miles to the west to become the father of our faith and the patriarch of the Jewish people. He then, with that man, chose to wait until this man and his wife were so old that they couldn't even have kids. But he blessed them with kids miraculously that would then continue their lineage and their legacy. Who am I talking about there? Anybody know? Abraham. He then chose a man whose name meant deceiver. If he's going to use somebody, he chose to use a deceiver. That man would go on to have 12 sons, and each of those sons would then be the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Does anybody know what I'm talking about there? Jacob. He chose a teenager enslaved in Egypt to save his people from starvation. Anybody know who that is? Joseph. He then chose a fugitive criminal to lead Israel out of their Egyptian slavery to the promised land. Anybody know who that is? Moses. He chose to lead them into that land through a flooded river and by marching around a fortified city enough times until that city walls fell. He then chose a shepherd boy to slay a giant and become the forebearer of the Messiah. Who would that be? David. And lastly, he chose a locust-eating desert dweller to then prepare the way for the Messiah. And who would that have been? How many of you scored at least one out of the 6 that I read? How many got them all? Wow. Now you've proven why you need to be in church in 2025, to know a little bit more about your Bible. Well, I tell you all this because to answer the why in which God would have sent his son the way he did, and Jesus would have ultimately chosen to come to earth the way that he did. If we were to look at the why of it, I think it kind of proves something about life. And here's where I would like to go with my comments. Because at 64 years of age, and I'm proud of that number today, what I have seen over the years is that there are a lot of people in the world that are like the astronauts, Butch and Suni, who was there sitting in the darkness of space, that are actually living lives today lost, stuck in darkness, and just as confused as they are. They're in a place of waiting, not sure if there is a God or what God is up to or where he is at this point in their lives. And like the astronauts, they are pretty stressed. They are anxious. They are alone. They are worried. And they are afraid. Not really sure about their purpose or what tomorrow even holds for them. And ultimately, we see that it's in that darkness that somehow or other God can minister to them. Because God does things different than the way that we do things. Would you agree on that? I mean, we know that if we get in an argument with our spouse, the best way to resolve it, gentlemen, is to say what? Oh, you're right. Yes, dear. I'm sorry. It goes a long way, doesn't it? We know how to fix some things, and it's amazing. You would think that our way would be the right way. But listen what God says himself. And this is over in Isaiah. And I'm going to ask you all to really pay attention to me from this point forward. Ready? Watch this. In Isaiah, Israel is in one of the darkest periods of their existence. They can't find God anywhere. It's darkness. It's confusion. It's actually punishment. And it's in this that God wants to bring them out of it. So listen what he says through this prophet Isaiah. It's chapter 55, towards the end of it. On the front end for 54 chapters, he's talking about their punishment. He's talking about their refuge or why they are in this isolation, why they're in this dark. It's like the dark ages for them. But now he starts to say something else, and he says it this way in verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth. And I love that because it fits into our message today about how to come out of heaven here to earth. He says, as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So how many know that God just does things different than we do? And we can't always make sense of it. But when we submit to it, notice then what he says. Because once you understand that his ways are just different than our ways, he then says, as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. Then, if you understand that, notice what he says. You will go out with joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. What is he saying? He's saying, maybe you don't know how I do life, because my ways are so different than yours. But if you trust my word, that my word that goes out from my mouth, the word that we actually read when we open the Bible, if you trust my word, that it has purpose attached to it, and it'll never return void, then understanding that, in the midst of your confusion and your darkness, you then can go out with joy and be led forth in peace. In a time when darkness was upon the people of Israel, God shared a promise right here that was true then, and it's more even true today because we see it played out regularly. It's actually the sentiments of a beautiful song that was sung by Babby Mason. And the words of that song says this: God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his hand, trust his heart. I remember a season of my life when I had to do just that. It was about 1992 when Hurricane Andrew came to town, and then in 1993, our family faced another hurricane. We had just bought a house, Mary and I did, down in the Palmetto Bay area. It was pretty destroyed from the hurricane, but it was the next level for us in our, it took us from our 2-bedroom townhouse in Devonair to graduate to something bigger for these kids that we will eventually have in that house, all 4 of them. At the same time, our family was rocked by a storm. And it was something that hit us that shouldn't have hit us because, let's face it, our world was pretty much an incubator where in the ministry we lived protected by certain things that should not hit a family. But it did hit our family. And it was one of those scenarios which I can't get into much detail for the sake of my own family's sake, but it was a do or die scenario. It was a make or break scenario. And we had to deal with it. And in order to do so, it took a family gathering and a sit down because we had to figure out how to fix this thing because it couldn't go on. Could have been the end of my mom and dad's marriage if one of them didn't get it together. In the middle of all of that, we were still trying to do some research on how bad things were, so we had some intel, if you would, that was being researched. My mom had gone out of town at the time. Actually, she went to Seattle on the other side of the United States. And she was just waiting for the report. I was at the house working that day in the garage. Had the radio playing, and how many remember back then a radio station called WMCU? You remember WMCU? They would have teaching and they would have Christian music. Well, I was listening to some of all of that, and I was waiting for an appointment where a person was to come over and deliver a report. And I remember getting the call, and the person said, "All right, I have it. I'll be right there. Where you at?" I told him where I was at. He was coming to me. And while he was about to get there, I was praying. I'm alone. I'm cutting baseboard because I'm finishing some work around the house. And I'm in that cold garage. And I remember his truck pulling straight up. And I'm praying, "Lord, let this be good news. Let this be good news." Only to get the report, to open it up and read it and see that it was bad news. It was everything that we feared, everything that we just didn't want to happen, and things that we were just praying would be different, but it wasn't. And we were face to face with the darkest of news. I'd never felt more alone. I had never felt more confused. I had never felt more anger. Things just didn't look right. And I remember sitting in the garage, and a song came on the radio. I remember this song because it was an old hymn, but it was re-recorded by, I don't know, it sounded like a Christian boy band back in the day. But the words of that song so touched my heart and helped me keep it together. They were simply saying in that song, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus." And I remember when I couldn't see anything. It was like a bull looking at red. All I had was anger towards my dad at that moment. That song got me to look off of my circumstances for a minute and look on to God, to that precious Son that was born in a manger. Some of you are shaking your heads because you've been there. Some of you are shaking your heads because you're there right now. And you're not sure how to handle that confusion or that darkness. See, in the days prior to Jesus' birth, Israel was there. For 400 years, 4 centuries, they had not heard a word from God. God was on mute. And all they had was some parchments filled with words that were written. And it's all that they had to hold on to. The very words of God that were written, but nothing new was spoken. It was darkness on the earth. And in the midst of that darkness, we see Jesus being sent as the light of the world. Some of you know that I enjoy to hunt. I love getting out there and getting into the country. And when we're there, waiting, sitting, watching nature, and hunting. I know for some they say, well, how could you do that? You're a pastor. You shouldn't be about killing animals. Well, it's not about killing animals, really. Now, there's a time and a moment for it, which helps you fill the freezer, and it's great. Similar to the steaks and the hamburgers and the fish that you eat. But one part of hunting that I really love is when we get out there early in the morning before daybreak and sunrise. Usually starts about 4:30. Most of the times the temperatures are in the 30s and the 40s when you get out that early, depending on the season. But it's so good, so different than what we know here in South Florida, which is why once you wrestle with the fact that you're going to wake up that early and you finally get dressed in your layers and you go out, you're so glad you did, because of the beauty that is revealed at daybreak. But before that daybreak ever occurs, you get out there early in the morning, pitch dark. You park pretty much far away from where you're going to go sit and hunt so you don't spook the animals. And you get out of that vehicle, you've turned off all your lights. You don't even go out with a flashlight because you don't want to mess up your eyes with the brightness that then have to adjust to the darkness. It takes way too long. But when you're out that early and you're walking down those paths in pitch dark, there's a tension to it. Because on one side, on one aspect of it, it's just so beautiful. You've got the rich, beautiful smell of the early morning that you're breathing. It's cool. You're out there and you look up, and on a clear night, millions of stars like a blanket within reach. You've seen stars, planets, and constellations that you never see in South Florida. But it's so beautiful. Then on the other side of it is the fear that comes with walking in the pitch black. Sure, you have a high-powered weapon on you, but you're not sure what's going to come out of the woods. They tell you there's no bear, but then again, you could be the first bear sighting or in the area and first bear attack, and that's what you're going to be known for. As Alessi was devoured by the first bear in Randolph County. Little sounds are magnified. You can swear it's a big animal coming your way, only to learn that it was just a squirrel that was chasing an acorn. In the dark, it's confusing. In the dark, it's scary. You can lose your whereabouts in the dark. And you can hardly see a foot in front of you. There's this inhibition. There's this fear. This lack of security that you experience when you're in the dark. And then what we do is sit in that dark for about an hour. Because what we woke up when we walked in, we now need to let go to sleep again. And so we sit and we wait. And before we know it, we'll start to see the morning start to wrestle with its nature. And daybreak occurs. And when that daybreak occurs and the sun starts to rise, then everything that was in darkness is now all of a sudden revealed. And the fear of the night is erased. You see, with the light comes illumination. With the light comes revelation. With the light comes clarity and comfort. Which is why Jesus declared himself to be the light of the world. And when he came as an infant, his presence revealed something about God that people had forgotten. It revealed that he is a loving God and that he's come to help us in our time of weakness, in our time of sin, in our time of failure. And for those people that had been in spiritual darkness for 4 centuries later, he revealed a love for them. The same love that he desires to reveal to each and every one of us today. So I wish to give you a gift on this Christmas. And that is to say that even in your most darkest of moments, in the most darkest of days, know God is your constant source of light. That he is there to help you keep a right perspective about your life so that you too can walk in the clarity, the confidence, and the comfort that only comes to those that can walk in the light. I pray over you today. Whatever darkness may be causing you insecurity and fear, whatever darkness has hit your life or your body or your relationships, whatever that darkness is, may the light of Jesus bring health, healing, and wholeness to you. And if that light is good enough for you, then I encourage you this Christmas, give the gift of the light of Jesus to others. Before you check out and click off this video, listen, thank you for letting us speak into your life. Hopefully, the message you heard has inspired and encouraged you. Now, if you want to find out more about Metro Life, you can go to our website at metrolifechurch.com. And right there, you'll see more and more about what this ministry offers you. It's great to have you joining us online, but we want you to step into our world if you feel so compelled to do so. And if you would like to make a donation through an offering, you can do so because right on your screen, there's a little tab for giving. Click on that tab. I promise you, you'll be blessed as you do give.
So thank you for watching with us. Thank you for joining our online campus family. We hope you have a great week, and we hope that if you're in the Miami area, that you would come and personally visit us so that we can shake your hand and get to know you. Have a great week.